Alright, today we're going to be learning about simplifying radicals. Okay, just like before in algebra when we had the fraction 4/8, we can't leave it like that because it's not as simple as possible. Okay, we want to look for the biggest number that was in common with both of those. Okay, well the biggest number that's in both of those is 4, so this reduces or simplifies to 1/2. Okay, notice that with this particular problem, okay, there's also a 2 in both of those. We could have said, oh, well, a 2 comes out of 4, a 2 could come out of 8. Okay, that would make this 2/4. All right, and that's fine, but we know that 2/4 still has something in common, still can be simplified further. Okay, we're going to apply that same process, that same idea to simplifying radicals. Okay, in order to do that, we worry about not pulling out the biggest thing that's in common, okay, because we only have one radical, but we're going to pull out the biggest perfect square, Okay, so our first step, what I want you to do today is write out the perfect squares up to 225. Okay, so perfect squares being the first perfect square, 1 squared is just 1, then 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, and so on. Pause the video, take a minute to get up all the way until you hit 225. Okay, I have them listed out here for you. Okay, 1 through 10 or 11 we're pretty familiar with. After that, we get a little bit iffy. Those are good numbers to remember because although these aren't all of the perfect squares, they keep going on forever. We could do 16 squared and 17 squared and so on. These first 15 are ones that we will need to be able to recognize because we use them so often. Okay. Now, to simplify radicals, what we're going to do first is just ask ourselves, is the number under the radical, is that number a perfect square? Well, 25, you bet it is, okay? It shows up on this list. 25 is a perfect square, and we know that the square root of 25 is just 5. Okay, that same idea for number 2 here. We've got the square root of 16. 16 is a perfect square, so we know that it will simplify down to the square root of 16, which is just 4. Okay, number 3, do we know if that one's a perfect square, though? Okay, we definitely don't see it on our list, but that's because our list doesn't go up as high. Okay, so if we're not sure if it's a perfect square or not, we can type that in our calculator and see if it is, if there's some number that multiplies by itself to get up to 900. Okay, so go ahead and type that in if you don't know, and we'll see if that is a perfect square. Okay, this one, in fact, is a perfect square, and the square root of 900 is 30. Okay, so just because it doesn't show up on our list doesn't mean it's not a perfect square. So it's always a good idea to check out that first to see if it is a perfect square. All right, on number 4, I'm sure you can handle it. The square root of 100 we know is 10. Okay, number 5 is different, though, because now we have a fraction showing up under the radical sign. Okay, what we're going to do, if we take the square root of a fraction, we can actually split that up into the square root of the numerator over the square root of the denominator. Okay, now we're just going to look at each piece at a time. We know that the square root of 36 is 6, and the square root of 49 is 7. Okay, so that is the simplified form of the square root of 36 over 49. All right, let's use that same process for the next one. If we've got the square root of 4/16, okay, really that is the square root of 4 over the square root of 16, okay, which gives us a 2 over 4. Okay, the problem with this one is 2 over 4, as simple as that can get. Okay, you do have to check for that, and we know there's a 2 in common with both of them, so this reduces to 1/2. Okay, the next one, same process. We'll take the square root of 4 over the square root of 25, and we know that the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 25 is 5. Okay, now is there anything that can be broken down there? Okay, in this case, that is as simple as we can get. There's nothing in common between 2 and 5. Okay, process stays the same for number 8. We're going to take the square root of 7 over the square root of 9. Okay, but is 7 a perfect square? Okay, if you're not sure, you can type it in your calculator, but we know 7 would fall in between 4 and 9 on our list up here, so it is not a perfect square. We're going to leave that exactly like the square root of 7. Okay, but we know on the denominator, the square root of 9 is a perfect square. That breaks down to 3, and that is our simplified answer. Okay, pause the video and go and take care of 9 and 10 for me. 9, we're going to use that same process, square root of 81 over the square root of 100, which simplifies to 9 over 10. Cannot be reduced. That is the simplified form. 10, square root of 64 over the square root of 25. Both of those break down, so we get 8 over 5. Again, there's nothing in common between those two numbers. That is our final form. Okay, for these next ones, again, our first step we want to do is ask ourselves, is 44 a perfect square? Okay, well in this case, 44 would appear on our list here. Okay, it's between 36 and 49, but it's not up there. That means it's not a perfect square. So what we're going to do is break these into what we know are perfect squares and what are not perfect squares. Okay, we're going to look at the factors of 44. Okay, like I said, 44 falls up here in between 36 and 49. What we're going to do is start at the highest number and work backwards. Okay, we're trying to find the biggest perfect square that goes into 44. Just like with those fractions, we didn't want any number that went into both. We wanted the biggest one. Okay, so we're looking for the biggest perfect square that goes into 44 evenly. Okay, so you're going to go through here. Does 36 go into 44 evenly? Okay, and it doesn't. What about 25? Again, no. 44 is not divisible by 16 either. Okay, 44 cannot be divided by 9. Okay, but 44 we know is divisible by 4. Okay, so 4 goes into 44 evenly. How many times? Okay, so we're looking how many times does 4 go into 44, and we know that is 11. Okay, if I take this number and this number, if I multiply it together, I better get that number I had up in this radical. Okay, well the point of this was to be able to simplify or break things down. Notice this number out front here, this square root of 4, can be broken down. We know the square root of 4 is just 2, so we're going to simplify the front half and bring the second half down. Okay, so the square root of 44 simplifies to 2 radical 11. Okay, let's do that same thing for 54. First thing, let's find where 54 falls in our chart here, because it's not a perfect square. It falls in between 49 and 64. Let's work backwards and ask ourselves, is 54 divisible by 49? Okay, that's no. What about 36? Okay, again, not divisible. We're going to work our way back here. 25 does not go in there evenly. Does 16? Okay, is 54 divisible by 16? Again, it's not, but what about 9? Okay, 9 is, because we know 9 times 6 gives me 54. Okay, the point of this is to break down that front half. We know square root of 9 is 3, and then we're going to tack on that square root of 6. Alright, let's do that same thing for the square root of 18. First step, we just want to find 18. Okay, it would fall in between 16 and 25 here. And then we're going to ask ourselves, moving backwards, does 16 go into 18 evenly? Okay, that's a no, but what about 9? It sure does. 9 goes into 18 2 times, so we've got our perfect squares and then our ugly ones over here that won't break down. Okay, the square root of 9 is 3. Bring down that radical 2, and our final simplest form is 3 radical 2. Alright, we're going to try a few more here. We've got the square root of 56. Okay, that falls in between 49 and 64 on our list here. And we're going to work our way backwards, just like we did on the last one. Okay, does 49 go into 56? It does not. Okay, same thing for 36. It does not go in evenly. Neither does 25. What about 16? Okay, if you're ever not sure, go ahead and type that in your calculator. Do 56 divided by 16 and see if it goes in evenly. Okay, in this case it does not, so we have to keep going. What about 9? Okay, again, it does not. Keep going. 4. Does 4 go into 56 evenly? And in this case, it does. Okay, then how many times does it go in there? Okay, that number, if you were typing them in your calculator to see if they worked, it goes in 14 times. Since this is the biggest perfect square we can pull out, this number is not going to be able to be simplified. Okay? This one we know will, though. The square root of 4 is 2. Just drag down that square root of 14, and that is your final answer. So on this next one, we're taking the square root of 27. Again, let's find where it falls on our list here. Okay, and that's between 25 and 36. Okay, working our way backward, what would the first perfect square that is divisible, that can be divided into 27? Okay, 25 isn't, 16 isn't, but we know that 9 goes into 27. Okay, and 9 goes into 27 3 times. Again, you can check yourself, make sure that 9 times 3 gives you that number under the radical. Okay, the point of this was so the front breaks down, and it breaks down to 3. Let's just drag down that other half, and our final simplified form here looks like 3 radical 3. Okay, again, this next one, it's not a perfect square, because if it's a perfect square, as long as it's less than 225, it'll show up on our list here. Okay, this one doesn't show up. We're going to find where it would fall, and it's between 49 and 64. And let's look through these numbers again. Okay, can 63 be divided by 49? Okay, not evenly. What about 36? Again, no. 25? No. 16? Again, no. What about 9? Okay, again, if you're ever questioning whether it goes in evenly, just type it in real quick, see if it does come out evenly. And in this case, the first perfect square and the only perfect square that goes in to 63 is 9. Okay, we know that 9 times 7 will give us a 63, and the square root of 9 is 3. This doesn't break down, so all we have to do is drag it down. Alright, take some time, pause the video, and finish up 17 through 20 for me. Okay, 17 through 20. Okay, make sure that what you came up with matches my answers up here. Okay, square root of 200 we broke down to 102. Simplified that front half, square root of 100 is 10. The next one, square root of 90, breaks down to 9 and 10. Okay, the first half, square root of 9 is 3. Drag down that 10. 19, the biggest perfect square that went into 125, was 25. Multiplied 5 times to get that 125. 25 breaks down to 5, and then just drag down that square root of 5. Okay, last one over here. This breaks down into the biggest perfect square was just a 4, and that went in 15 times. Okay, so we've got square root of 4 times the square root of 15, which simplifies to 2 radical 15.